nationwide protests today against President Trump, against his governing plans in multiple cities, and also in a sign of how fast things are moving, protests that call out a single billionaire in a way we haven't seen in terms of concern about the ruling elite or the business class or whatever you want to call it. We haven't seen that a lot, not since Occupy Wall Street, certainly not in this last several years, but some of the signs and some of the locations we're tracking show people concerned. You can see in the upper right, we didn't elect Musk. We're going to get into all of this and what could be the signs of a resurgence with Democratic strategist James Carville. So that's happening right now. We're going to get to that. While we begin with the crash landing there in Toronto, Canada, where a Delta Airlines plane basically crashed and turned flipping upside down on the runway. We know the flight came from Minneapolis, and around 2:45 p.m. Eastern, you got what the airport says was a time where all passengers and crews have been accounted for. There have been over a dozen injuries. Passengers were seen exiting the footage. 80 total people were on board, and we have no reported deaths. But the scene is drawing attention for the images like this. We've shown you several here. I was going to tell you this one, courtesy of John Nelson, is one of the most harrowing. You can see people getting out to safety and them trying to control the situation and make sure there's no further fire or other danger. But the plane completely upside down, and that's how people were forced to exit. Their FAA also says that the Transportation Safety Board of Canada will be investigating this crash and their ongoing safety concerns given some recent incidents that people know about. The mid-air collision in Washington, that was about 3 weeks ago and was far more deadly, killing 67. Also, a plane crash in Philadelphia earlier this month where 7 people died. Now, aviation experts will always tell you that there are so many more flights every day all around the world that take off and land safely, and that you can't draw too much from any individual data. And yet, we also live in a world of real people who have to decide whether they want to fly or not, and the level of concern and risk people want to take. And this comes against, in the United States, a lot of scrutiny on how the Trump administration has been going after the safety of airplanes in the Federal Aviation Administration. Not saying there's some causal link, but rather people asking whether, given the threats and the risk out there, is this the time to be cutting back on federal aviation experts, staff, the people with experience? Elon Musk, meanwhile, sent a team from his SpaceX rocket company to visit the FAA headquarters. Musk reviewing the agency that he's supposed to be on equal bargaining terms with, and there's an allegation SpaceX violated safety rules in the past. So again, a lot of scrutiny on how safety works and what the priorities are and whether you cut corners to make money or not, because there have been these mass layoffs under the Trump administration at the FAA. And one of the unions there says this will only increase workload at a time where employees are further stretched thin. Again, we don't have evidence, and the news is not indicating any direct causal link here, but rather a larger question of whether this is the time to cut back on aviation safety, and is this being done in a competent, thought-out manner? Those are the first sort of primary safety concerns. The second-order concerns are whether Elon Musk, who doesn't run the FAA, hasn't been put on the cabinet, whether he should have this much authority. The courts, as you know from following the news, are tackling some of those related cases. The Trump administration also fired workers just last week at the National Nuclear Security Administration, not a place where you usually see rapid cutbacks. They oversee the United States stockpile of nuclear warheads, which number in the thousands. So there were these swift cutbacks, but in a sign that even the Trump administration thinks that was a bad idea, within a day, they tried to take it back, seeking to rehire some of the workers they'd fired the day prior, struggling to find them because they didn't even have their new contact information. Not exactly a portrait of competence. Politico reporting a chaotic set of mass firings over 3,000 people at health agencies, which was so unorganized, even some Trump political appointees were unaware which of their own employees were being fired or why. Today, there are also reports that Musk's team is trying to get access to your most sensitive personal data that the government holds, your taxpayer information, which, as everybody knows, can be sort of a blueprint to a lot of parts of your life, public or private. The IRS is alarmed. It includes detailed financial information about every taxpayer, business, and nonprofit in the country. This is tightly guarded stuff, and it's being seized or attempted to be seized by someone who won't even release his financial disclosures, Elon Musk, like the other cabinet officials. There's also efforts to install another Musk aide there. Trump and Musk, and what they're doing, this agenda, which isn't exactly just focused on lowering the price of eggs, is the context for today's President's Day protest. Many of these signs show that people are informed, they are engaged. They're not just talking about the idea or the brand of Trump and Musk, but the recent mass firings, the gutting of federal workforce, things that, quite frankly, are quite distant from some of what Trump campaigned on, particularly in those closing months. You can see Washington, large crowds just across from the U.S. Capitol. You can see here, this is what the new protest movement is starting to look like, and this is one feature amidst other places. New York City, protesters downtown in Union Square. Again, a sign that people are expressing themselves with their time, precious time off if they have the holiday, free time they might have gotten, a lunch break, depends on the person, but this is one of the ways that you see civic engagement, separate from an election, which was, by the way, decided by 1.5 points. It's also in other places like Michigan, a smaller town of St. Joseph, where we saw people gathering, again, smaller crowds for a smaller area, but gathering even amidst the cold, showing their signs to passersby, drivers, etc. And then in warmer environs, Miami, San Francisco, we're also seeing this across the country today, Albany.